The 911 call that came after the funeral. They folded the flag for him at the little brick church on Ellsworth Avenue, and the wind tried to take it twice before the honor guard's hands persuaded it to behave. It was a raw Thursday in late January in a river town in southeastern Ohio, the kind of cold that makes sound travel farther than sense. The man in the casket was Eamon Ridge, a volunteer firefighter and the sort of neighbor who shoveled 2 extra porches without mentioning it later. The service ended at 4, the last handshake landed at 4:20, and by nightfall, the street had gone back to being only a street. At 9:13, Leora Penn took her seat at the county dispatch console, slid on her headset, and watched the board come alive. At 9:31, the line marked 911 flashed with a familiar number. His number, the man everyone had just buried. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Leora had fielded storms and barn fires, and wrong turns called in as kidnappings. She had coaxed calm from people whose words came like hail on a tin roof. She had heard the first breath of a baby through a phone held in shaky hands, and the last breath of a stranger who needed someone to hear it. She was 34, kept her hair short to keep the headset from snagging, and wore a gray cardigan because the room ran cold to keep the computers honest. Her desk held 2 photographs wedged into the bezel of the monitor. One showed a river in summer, green as a promise. The other showed Eamon and his daughter Cass standing in front of the station engine with that look people get when duty gives them a reason to grin. The year was 2022. The county had upgraded the system, and the board pulsed with the soft light of new money that still felt like a borrowed suit. Lines identified towers and cross streets. Repeat callers had little tags. When Eamon's number flashed, it wore the tag she had put on it a year ago, Station 4. Her stomach made a small, foolish turn. Her hand did not. She tapped the line open. 911. What is your emergency? Static, not empty. The kind of static that carries weather in its mouth. A faint hiss like tires on wet asphalt far away, then a click as if someone had covered the microphone with a thumb and lifted it again. Leora glanced at the automatic location box. The system offered a circle that could have been a dozen blocks wide and no more. The tower showed the bluff above the river. The timer on the call rolled past 10 seconds, then 15. The headset warmed in her hand. "Hello," she said, voice even, the way training turns fear into architecture. "If you can speak, I am here." Something moved under the static. A breath, slow, disciplined. The way firefighters learn to breathe through a mask like they are rationing the ocean. She had listened to Eamon for years as he called in traffic stops and barn smokes and mutual aid requests in that unshowy voice he kept, even when the ceiling thought it was tired of being a ceiling. Her throat tightened without permission. The board did not care. It kept time. The night supervisor, Brandt, rolled his chair closer, not touching her cord. He was 50, part-time philosopher, full-time keeper of snack drawers. His eyebrows asked a question he did not give words to. Leora tapped a note onto the incident log with deliberate fingers. Caller number displays as decedent from earlier funeral. Open line. Faint audio. Possible misroute for memorial device. Possible spoof. Monitor. "Eamon," she said quietly, because sometimes names open doors the way keys do. "If you can hear me, give me any sound." The line breathed once more, then found a voice. Not bright, not ghostly, a man speaking like someone who had walked all day and only now remembered he could sit. It said one sentence, 3 words, patient, back door locked. Brandt's hand hovered over the radio mic. Leora nodded once. He paged Station 2 because Station 4 was morning, and Station 2 would show up with their coats half buttoned and their hearts arranged like a team. He sent them to the Ridge home on Quint Street, the small white place with a porch swing that had never let a guest feel foolish for needing to sway a minute. Leora kept her voice on the line. "Back door, locked," she repeated, writing it, hearing it, feeling the way the sentence wanted to be a map. "Is someone inside?" Nothing answered at first. Then a second sentence, softer. "Cass asleep. Brant's fingers were already moving the way piano players do when the song makes them want to be faster than they are. Officers on the midnight swing shifted their routes without complaint. The medic crew out of town angled their rig toward Quince in case Grief had found a trick that needed medical names. Leora sent a quick text to the on-call clergy liaison because the county did not believe in letting families be alone with what they could not name. "Amen," she said, "steady. We're sending them. Stay with me if you can." The line hissed like rain on a steel roof, and then went quiet. Not the click of a hang-up, the kind of quiet a room makes when a story finally sits down. The call timer rolled to 1 minute 23 seconds, then stopped. Disconnected, the board told her, cheerful as a toy that believes its work noble. Brant opened his mouth and then closed it. He reached for his coffee and decided it was the wrong kind of night for coffee and reached for water instead. Leora sat very still for a moment and felt the way adrenaline stands up in your body and refuses to sit until you give it a task. She gave it the task of listening. The lines danced with ordinary need. A possum in a kitchen. A husband who had cut his hand on a jar. A neighbor who had heard a window break and then realized it was the television. Her hands did their work. Her ear held a room for the line that had gone quiet. Officer G. Park radioed in first. Voice crisp. Tires crunching on salt in the street. Unit 3-1. Quince Street. Back porch light on. Back door indeed locked. Copy request to knock. "Copy," Leora said, hearing her own voice make simple shapes. "Proceed." There are knocks that sound like questions and knocks that sound like the start of a fight. Officer Park knocked like a person who has played in a string quartet. Firm, meticulous, willing to wait between knocks. Leora heard the long, thin silence on the open radio channel that means everyone has decided to breathe in sync. A porch swing creaked, whether from wind or memory. Then Park again, softer. Visual on subject in living room. Teen. Asleep on couch. Television on mute. No visible distress. We are making entry. Park called the locksmith number taped to his visor, because there is always one, and he also called the small cheat that officers inherit, which is to lift the back door on its tired hinges when you turn the key the wrong way. The door opened, a floorboard confessed itself. Park moved through a small kitchen that smelled like heat and spice and thyme. He said, quiet as a blessing, "Cass, it's G, it's me." The girl woke with that rough sound grief makes when it has only just let go for half an hour at last. "Back door," Park said into his shoulder mic. "Locked, now secured." Subject breathing, oriented, tearful, says she fell asleep and forgot the back after the last aunt left. She says her dad would have said it. She says she heard him say it sometimes, even when he was alive, when she forgot. "I'm locking up, then staying here until her aunt returns." The call had been the little bridge a county makes when one house cannot manage all its doors alone. Leora typed. She logged, she breathed. She answered a call about a siren that would not stop on a fire alarm panel, which is a call that can ruin a night or return it to its usable shape. She told Brant she needed 30 seconds, stood up from her console, walked to the stainless sink by the break room door, and washed her hands as if she had been in a kitchen that required respect. At 10:48, the line lit again. Same number. The board did not know how to feel about that and chose its usual indifference. Leora took it. 911. A voice lives inside a headset after a while. The nerves learn routes, the body decides where to keep the sound. The phrase came through low and clear. Basement. Pilot light. She did not hesitate. She sent the fire crew already on Quince next door. She told Park. She told the aunt, who had come breathless from her own house 3 blocks away, that they were going down the cellar stairs for the little square of flame that keeps a winter from doing more harm than good. She heard Cass in the background say, without fright, he always listened to the furnace like it was trying to tell him a joke. Engine 3 called in. Pilot light out. Gas smell minimal. Windows open. Relit. Carbon monoxide monitor registers safe. A firefighter Rowe, who had once done stand-up for exactly 2 open mic nights, and then decided his comedy belonged in the bay with his coworkers, added gently, Whoever called this in has good ears. The board calmed, the town kept its little noises, the river told the ice what to do, and the ice obeyed or not. Leora's shift slid past midnight. At 1:19, she poured tea she did not want and drank it because warm things are a kind of law. At 1:40, an old man reported a woman knocking on his side door asking for a light, and she sent Park and his partner again, and it turned out to be a neighbor who had locked herself out, and they laughed about solutions and did not mention grief, so it would not be tempted to take that house too. At 2:19, when the dispatch room feels like a lighthouse that forgot whether the bay is wide or just an eager creek, the line lit a third time. Leora did not say amen out loud. She let the humanities teacher voice in her head that once told her names have heft say it for her. 911. This time the sentence was longer. Not elaborate, not difficult. The kind of sentence men say when they've spent their lives making tool lists. Check the pan on the back burner. Leora's fingers moved before she could tell them to, and 10 seconds later, Park said on the radio that a pan of oil sat glowing on the stove, forgotten by a cousin who had come bearing food, and then wept, and then gone to call another cousin and set the phone down on the porch rail. Park killed the burner, slid the pan onto a cold eye, and said, "Tell whoever's on that line thank you again." She said, "I will," and understood how inadequate that was, and also how there is no better sentence at 2:20 in the morning when a house has been held upright by 2 extra words spoken by a man with no air left to push them. By dawn, the calls had slowed to their usual winter trickle. The board made its little satisfied beeps, the shift change crept near. Leora printed the overnight logs for the lieutenant in charge and set them in the bin with the neatness of a person who believes paper is a form of kindness. She took off her headset, set it on the hook, and let her neck decide it had been a stiff night. On her drive home, the river looked like a sheet of hammered tin under a sky that had not yet decided whether to blush. She stopped at the corner store for milk and oranges. The clerk rang her up and asked if she had been at the funeral, because everyone had been at the funeral, even if they had not parked their bodies in a pew. Leora said yes, and the clerk said he had known Eamon since they were boys, back when the river took 2 boys and gave back 1, and how the one who came back had never raised his voice again, unless it was to make a frightened kid laugh in a smoky basement. Leora listened. The clerk put 2 extra oranges in her bag, the way men do when they feel the night reach its hand into the room and cannot keep all the light from leaving. She slept until noon and then sat in her kitchen with the radio low and the blinds open to teach the afternoon how to behave. Her phone chimed with a message. It was Cass. Leora had given her number to the aunt without thinking, and nothing about this felt like a boundary violation now. The message was a picture of a backdoor lock and a caption. "He did it again, thank you." She replied, "You did it." He reminded, "That is a team." Cass sent back a heart in the color teens choose when they mean it and do not want to seem silly. Word traveled without gossip's teeth in it. People told each other the version they could bear. Some said the call after the funeral had been a trick of towers, an echo, a message scheduled by a grieving mind that had set a reminder on a phone. Some said Eamon was still doing his rounds, making sure pilot lights and pans behaved. The chaplain said he did not know the mechanics of it and did not care, that love gets to serve in whatever uniform it likes. The fire chief said quietly to Leora, "If my number ever lights your board and I am not in a position to help myself, send the crew. I will not be offended if you use my name to get them there faster." It is Wannon. The next week brought the kind of snow that erases the edges of things. Leora worked 3 overnights in a row and learned to sleep in squares of 4 hours like a cat. She took a call from a man who had found his wife on the floor and guided him to count and compress, and the medics arrived before the counting rasped the hope out of his voice. She took a call from a woman who had locked herself in a bathroom because her boyfriend had stopped being gentle, and she kept the woman talking about the photograph on the wall while the officers climbed the stairs 2 at a time. She did not think about the line until it lit again 2 Fridays later at 1 in the morning. She kept her voice clean. 911. Eamon's voice came again, thinner, like a person speaking through a scarf. It said, in a tone part instruction and part apology, box of matches in the junk drawer beside the oven. Throw them out. She told Park. Park went. He opened the drawer and found a box that had wicked itself damp and mean. He took it to the back porch and soaked it and binned it and then came inside and wrote a sticky note for Cass that read, "Your dad told on you." She woke to it and laughed in that shocked way laughter has when it has been given back its license to exist. Not every call was that kind. Once, the line connected, and all Leora could hear was faint wind and the hollow tick of a cooling engine, and she understood, without needing the lieutenant's later confirmation, that this had been the night the station bays opened, and Eamon's truck had been driven back from the long, slow procession, and the engine had clicked in that language. Machines use to admit fatigue. Once, the line carried only a sound, like boots on gravel, exactly 3 steps, then the pause of a man looking at a sky he used to know from a ladder truck. Once, nothing came at all. And still, she stayed on the line the way you stay on a porch after a friend has gone inside, just in case one more sentence needs to come out and walk around in the air. Spring loosened the river. April made the churchyard look less stern. Cass finished school with a concentration that made her teachers write small notes on the bottom of her papers. You have turned into a person who trusts herself. Leora saw her at the station on an open house Saturday, and the girl hugged her the way nieces do their aunts without asking for the right to be related. They stood under the engine bay's great door and listened to the way small kids treat sirens like musical instruments when given permission. Cass said she sometimes still heard it, the way a voice comes into a room without needing to open the door. She said the voice had told her to bring in the porch rug before a thunderstorm that would have flung it across the block. She said the voice had told her to drink water before her stomach had the language to beg for it. "What do you think it is?" she asked, not demanding that it be a ghost or an algorithm. "I think you live in a county where people answer one another when called," Leora said. "I think sometimes lines open from one room to another because the rooms were built that way by love. I think if we say it out loud too many times, the day will get shy and pretend it never happened. And I think your dad trained his whole body to go when someone needed a sentence, and I do not know what training looks like later. Thanks for watching Allen's To Help Pray." Cass nodded as if she had been offered advice about lifting with her legs, not her back. She put her hands on the engine's bumper like a kid checking the pulse of a whale and whispered thanks in the dull shine where she thought it might carry. The last call came in July, on a night that smelled like cut grass and the electric promise of storm. The board was quiet. Brant had his feet crossed at the ankle, the way he did only after midnight when the county behaved. The line lit. Leora took it with the care of a person accepting a candle in wind. 911. There was no static, no breath, only a single word, perfectly ordinary, soaked in a patience she would remember until the last hour of her life. Enough. Enough what? She asked, back straight, pencil ready. The word came again, a thought set gently on a table. Enough. Then a long exhale, the temperature of a day in which someone has put down a tool they are proud to have used and is ready to wash their hands. She typed the word. She did not send units. She did not mention it to Brant until the end of the hour, when she said it out loud the way you say a number twice to make sure you got it right. He nodded. He threw a cough drop to her like a baseball, and she caught it and laughed because bodies insist on living. There were no more calls after that. The system reassigned numbers as systems do. The board forgot how to glow with that tag. When Leora sat at her desk and the photographs leaned against the monitor made their steady witness, she still sometimes heard the faint tap of a firefighter's gloved hand on a doorframe, the universal signal for ready. She bought a small, heavy key hook for her own kitchen, put it by the back door, and never forgot again. She found that when she walked past the Ridge place on mornings when she needed to see the river before she could trust the day, she would look at the back door and feel not a haunting, not an ache, but the exact rectangular comfort of a thing that had been understood and done. If this kind of thing ever happens where you live, if a phone rings after a set of shoulders in town have lowered themselves to the work of grief, if a name appears on your console that your heart wants to call impossible, do what Leora did. Answer. Stand in the narrow bridge between rooms, ask short questions with soft edges, send help, write down exact words. The world is made of exact words and the work that follows them. Believe nobody and nothing too hard. Let the river decide what is memory and what is rumor. And when the voice finally says enough, let your hands say thank you by resting them, palm down, on the desk you have kept clean so the night can put its weight there for a minute. And if you are sitting in your kitchen with a back door that gets forgetful, say the date out loud to bring the day to heal. Late January 2022. Early April 2022. The hot night in July when rain forgot its manners. Say the town's name so it will remember it has one. Say Amen. Say Cass. Say Leora. Practice the sentence that saved a pan and a pilot light in a teenager who deserved a house that understood locks. Back door locked. Then lock it, then sleep. The county will keep its watch. The river will balance its own ledger. Somewhere, a dispatcher you will never meet will lay a pencil down on a pad with a line drawn through the last open box, a small, perfect check that means this part of the night is finished and the next part may begin. The hotel room that prints receipts at 17 amperes. M. The first night, the receipt printer woke her. It coughed once in the dark, warmed its little brass roller, and began to spit out a strip of thermal paper that glowed faintly like a cigarette behind cupped hands. The room clock said 2:17 in pale blue digits. Vesper Klein lay very still in bed 5B at the Scissortail Hotel, a brick-walled midtown remnant on North Boston Avenue in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and listened to the tiny buzz and chirp as the machine printed, paused, and printed again, as if it were resuming a conversation it had been having without her for years. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? She had checked in late after a client dinner that went long on promises and light on dessert. The year was 2019, early November. The air outside clean after a narrow band of rain slid through, and the sidewalks shone like varnished stage floors. Vesper was 33, a freelance systems tech who patched networks for small hotels that couldn't afford to be down and couldn't afford to hire someone full-time. She traveled with a canvas tool roll, a spare router, a zippered pouch of adapters that looked like a magician's deck, and a mug with a hairline crack she liked to think of as its signature. The Scissortail was her kind of place. A lobby with a brass bell that had learned restraint, a front desk shelf of paperback mysteries for the taking, a night auditor who watched the door like a friend watches a house while you're out of town. He'd been the one to hand her the key card and the 2-page Wi-Fi map, Quill Penner, printed on a plastic badge, as if the name might be borrowed for the night. Night auditors aren't chatty by design, but Quill had leaned forward when she asked for the room farthest from the elevator. He'd said 5B is quiet most of the time, then paused, weighing whether to add something. He didn't. He pointed at the coffee station and said, "The cinnamon packets are the good ones." The printer sat on the desk under the window, small and stubborn, the kind of ticket machine you see in diners and old theaters. No USB cable trailed from it, which made Vesper grin in the dark because devices without visible leashes are both a challenge and a dare. The narrow receipt paper advanced in 2-inch bursts. The room smelled faintly of dust and citrus, the ghost of cleaning solution, and something else warm plastic maybe, or the metallic tang of heat on a coil. She slid out of bed, toes finding the rug, shoulders remembering every winter morning she had reached for her hoodie before her thoughts. The window showed a slice of downtown in sodium yellow, a parked truck with a tarp that breathed a little in the wind, a streetlight haloed just enough to be kind. She stood over the printer and watched it work. The top of the fresh strip read guest ledger at the margin, then a line of text that made her blink. Check-in, Harlan Row, rate $14.50, room 5B arrival, the 12th of October, 1958, comments, 2 pillows only. The paper was unbrowned, the font bold. She knew thermal stock fades to beige with sunlight, goes blotchy with time, and curls if you leave it near a vent. This looked new, but the data was from a year you had to say out loud to make it believable. The printer hummed again and produced another line. Check-in, Odetta Meyer. Rate, $12. Room, 5B. Arrival, the 4th of May, 1957, comments, traveling with songbooks. She tore the strip and laid it flat on the desk, then pressed a finger to the cool plastic of the printer, as if touch might confess what the eye couldn't. The machine did not shake. It simply waited, polite as a clerk, with more to say. At 2:23, it stopped. A little green light near its only button winked twice like a made-up code. Vesper set the paper on a coaster, lay back down, and stared at the ceiling where the streetlight's slatted glow made a grid like a rehearsal. In 2 minutes, the heater clicked, the mini-fridge answered with its own throat clearing, and her body did the sensible thing it does when a problem cannot be solved and the hour is improper, it slept. Daylight always rationalizes the night. Vesper showered, dressed, and went downstairs with questions arranged in her mouth as if they were items on a parts list. Quill stood behind the desk with a pen balanced across his knuckles like a small seesaw. Room 5, B printed receipts at 2:17, she said, like a person reporting a minor plumbing miracle. She slid the strip across. He read it, eyes moving left to right once, then again slower. He did not touch the paper, as if touching would make him complicit in whatever time wanted. He leaned in. You know how old buildings have old anchor points. You hang a new painting, but the wall still remembers the nail. He lowered his voice. That room was a manager's office back when this place was the Francis Motor Lodge. They kept a ledger in there, typed out receipts on a half-width machine bolted to the desk. At close, they printed a roll of check-ins for the night, tore it, and rubber-banded the strip to the hardback ledger. Quill tapped the counter. Once, twice. I've heard the story since I was a kid. But the machine in that room was long gone when the Scissortail bought the building. That, he nodded toward the strip, is a thermal ticket printer from the last decade. We put it in to spit bar tabs during wedding weekends. He smiled without humor. The bar's downstairs. He told her what he knew, which was more than most people get for free before 10 in the morning. 2 nights a month, irregular but stubborn, the printer in 5B came alive at 2:17 and printed names from when the room was an office, and the office took cash, and the cash came with a handshake, and sometimes a song. Housekeeping had tried unplugging it, but the little machine held on to its paper and its green light like a dog holds a ball. Engineering had replaced it with a new unit. The new unit learned the trick too, as if the wire in the wall had a voice. Once, a manager put the printer in another room. It printed in the other room. At 2:17, Vesper asked the question an auditor would ask, why 2:17? Quill lifted a shoulder. Night audit on the old system rolled at 2. The manager, a woman named Adelaine Merritt, he wrote in her diary, he gestured toward the wall where black and white photos of the old Francis hung in frames. The audit took 17 minutes most nights because the room charge calculation was slow. He winked, a habit to soften hard edges. That's what the Haunted History Tour says anyway. My grandmother worked housekeeping here in the 60s. She said Adelaine was the kind of woman who could silence a room by looking at a clock. Quill slid the strip back to Vesper. I don't put much stock in anything that prints on its own. But I don't stay in 5B either. She laughed, but softly. I'm the right kind of superstitious, she said. The kind that believes in loose cables and also in writing down names. She folded the strip, tucked it in her notebook, and promised the front desk a stronger signal on the north wing by supper. Work made the morning sensible. Vesper crawled into the equipment closet on 5, balanced her laptop on an inverted bucket, and watched packets move in tidy lines across her screen. The Scissortail's network roamed like a polite guest slow if you needed it to be fast. Fast if you weren't asking. She pushed a firmware update, tuned channel widths, stood on a chair to re-angle a ceiling antenna the way you point your head to listen better. Lunch came from a food truck with a chalkboard menu and a line that made the air smell like cilantro and good intentions. She ate on the loading dock, the sun finding her cheekbones and telling her to stop worrying about things no one pays you to worry about. The second night, the printer coughed at 2:17 on the dot. The room's clock, which she had not trusted since it flashed 12:12 after she plugged her phone charger, matched her wristwatch exactly. The printed strip listed names, again, 5 this time, each with a rate that made the era plain. Miguel Corrado, Della and Sten Bay, Bellamy H. Cross, Traveling Sales, G. Whitlow. The comments field sometimes added a phrase that felt like a quotation. Traveling with songbooks. Baby sleeps light. Keep the radio low. She tore the strip and laid it beside the previous one. The heater ticked its approval. She sat cross-legged on the rug, laptop open, the printer's power cord draped across her thigh. If it's a room ghost, she murmured, it should ignore me. If it's a network ghost, I may as well listen. Her laptop saw the printer as a simple thing on the subnet, a networked ticket device with a default login and a queue history that should have been empty and wasn't. Vesper scrolled. A job log rolling back months, logged exactly 2 entries each night with the flag source, legacy. Someone had written a silly little module into the Scissortail's aging property management system, a module that echoed old file structures for nostalgia tours during October. She'd seen that kind of thing done for fun. But this module contained descriptors she didn't recognize. Ledger spool, carriage return key, ribbon jam. These were words from a different machine. The audit program triggered at 2. The ghost queue called itself at 2:17. She checked where it pointed. The path wasn't a path, it was a device ID that didn't match any modern naming scheme. She pinged the device. No answer. She traced the MAC. The vendor code came back to a company that died before the internet had central registration. That made her skin feel too tight. In the morning, white coffee cups clacked, and the lobby television played low, the weatherwoman pointing at a band of storms where storms like to form. Vesper asked Quill if there were schematics for the old building. He pointed to the office behind the desk. Ground plan framed on the wall. Maybe useful. The hotel had been 2 buildings stitched at the seam. The Francis Motor Lodge on the east, a narrower annex that used to be a savings bank on the west, joined by a flyover corridor at 3 and a clumsy arch at 5. Room 5B sat where the old bank manager's office once had been, according to a penciled note at the edge of the plan. There, a scrawl, printer niche, in lighter pencil, spare line to basement. Quill warmed to the problem the way night auditors do when daylight invites them to be citizens. He called maintenance. A man named Orson arrived in a polo with his name stitched in blue and a toolbox that had its own opinions. Together, they moved the desk in 5B 6 inches and then 3 and exposed a painted-over conduit hole at the baseboard with a thumb-width chase running down into the wall. Orson whistled between his teeth. That's no Romex. That's armored cable from a generation that believed steel could keep time. He tapped the baseboard with the handle of his screwdriver. It answered with the hollow ring of an old closet. In the basement, they found the closet where the spare line went to not exactly die. The air was colder down there, humid the way the past is humid. A metal cabinet stood against the wall, padlocked, a gray panel humming like a neighbor practicing scales. Orson tested the lock with a pick he swore he hadn't lost. The door swung open. Inside, another little printer sat, twin to the one upstairs, its power indicator dark, its paper roll neat as a submitted term paper. A thin cable ran from a bracket down into a conduit box with 2 stories to tell. One was modern CAT cable, patched to the Scissortail's switch. The other looked like fabric-insulated wire on lead. Orson touched it with reverence and withdrew his hand. You shouldn't be alive, he murmured to the box. Then he turned to Vesper. Want me to pull the breaker for this room tonight at 2:15? See if it stops. She shook her head before she quite knew why. The motion felt rude. Let me listen once more, she said. Then, if it's a loop, we cut it. The 3rd night, nothing is supposed to happen. Patterns prefer 3 as a way to make you distrust them. Vesper made tea in the room kettle with the cinnamon packet Quill had sworn by. She texted her brother a photo of the printer and a caption that read, Haunted Bar Bill. And he sent back the shrug emoji that meant, I love you, but weirdness is your brand. At 2:17, the printer began, but this time the sound rode a breath of air cold enough to raise her arm's small hairs. She stood close enough for the paper to curl against her knuckles and read each line as it arrived. Check-in, Adelaine Merritt. Rate, comp, room, 5B. Arrival, the 12th of October, 1958. Comments, night audit. She reached for the strip and her fingers trembled, mildly, like a person handed the microphone at a small funeral. The machine whirred without printing for a count of 6, then resumed, the font just a touch lighter. Check-in, Quince Palmer. Rate, $9.50. Room, 3:09. Arrival, the 12th of October, 1958. Comments, meeting at dawn. The room held its usual choir, fridge, heater, hallway, ice machine, 2 turns down, but behind it all, she heard a soft clicking. Not printer, not clock. Keys. The slow press and release of typewriter keys. Somewhere not in the room and not far enough away. She froze, because freezing is a way of letting more senses work. Her body made itself a listening instrument. The keys whispered. Again, 3 strokes. Pause. 2. The printer spit a final line. End of ledger. Prepared by A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes, M. Vesper did what the body asks. She sat on the bed with the strip in her lap and waited for her breath to level. It did. The heater ticked, the fridge purred, the typewriter stopped pretending, the sound folded itself up and slid under the door. She slept because being a person who works with systems means you've learned to stack your fear on a shelf when there's nothing urgent to do with it. Morning turned the printer into a device again. She took the strip down to the desk. Quill stared at the word comp and the name he had heard his grandmother say on summer porches when the heat wanted out of the day. He asked to borrow the strip to show his manager, a woman with the fast walk gait of someone who plans 2 days all the time. The manager's name was Letha Croft, and she looked at the strip like a problem that could be solved with a memo. She was polite and firm. "We have tours on Fridays for the people who want goosebumps," she said. "We prefer to keep the goosebumps from rewriting our Google reviews." Vesper smiled, a tight little smile that said, "I won't post, I don't do that work, I just want to know what the wire knows." Letha sighed. The Scissortail was a college internship that never ended for her. The building was her thesis. She pointed at the framed photo behind the desk. Adelaine Merritt, hair pinned like a decision, stood at a wooden desk the size of a Buick, hand on a ledger book, face turned to a camera that had learned to respect her. The caption read, "Francis Motor Lodge, C1959, Night Manager." Letha lowered her voice. Family lore says Adelaine died at her desk in 2003 after the building had been empty 6 years because she refused to move a box when the bank wanted it. The family had the key to the back door from the old days. She snuck in sometimes to straighten things that did not require her. A neighbor saw her light. By the time anyone checked, the coffee had gone cold and she'd written the date on a yellow legal pad with a line under it, like an anchor. I don't know if the story is true. I do know names have a way of using rooms until you say them out loud and then they rest. That afternoon, Vesper sat on the floor of 5B with her laptop and a coil of patience. She sniffed the packets between server and printer and saw the little ghost job present a string of bytes at 2 minutes past 2, announce itself as ready at 2:16, and request the queue at 2:17 with a line that included a date spelled in words, not numbers. October 12. She set a capture to record it tonight. She did not know what she would do with the proof, but the act of capturing felt like putting a box around a wild thing without requesting its death. The 4th night, she did not sleep. At 2:16, the room gathered itself. At 2:17, the printer began. The first name landed like a quiet gavel, Harlan Rowe. Again, as if the ledger wanted to list the set that belonged with the date, as if the building had a playlist for that night and needed it to end correctly. The second name, Odetta Meyer. The third, Quince Palmer. The machine word, then it printed a line that wasn't a line she understood. Checkout, A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes. M. Balance, $0. Drawer, locked. The room changed temperature by a needle's width. The way a body registers changes a thermostat does not. The typewriter sound returned, louder, as if the keys had moved closer, as if someone had rolled the desk chair to the doorway. Vesper stood. The bathroom light made a rectangle on the carpet. She turned it off and let the room be only the room. In the dark, a kind of courtesy arrived. She spoke to the space like a person speaks to a skittish animal. "I hear you," she said softly. "I see what you print. If you're finishing something, finish. If you need a witness, I'm here." The keys worked once, gently. The printer fed a final inch and stopped. The heater clicked off as if called on. The fridge made a small, delighted sound, the way fridges do when they extract a victory from physics. Vesper lay down slowly, like a person trying not to wake a toddler, and watched the window make a square on the wall. She did not sleep much. She did not feel punished by that. On Friday, Quill called his grandmother. She came in with a smile that wore 80 years as if they were a favorite cardigan. Her name was Thalia Penner. She had hands that did hair buns right the first time and eyes that counted change without looking. She stood in 5B and curtsied to the air, lightly, like a joke only the past finds funny. She pointed at the baseboard where the printer niche had been long before this printer knew it was one. And she told a story the way people in the middle of the country tell them, in straight lines, with pauses for the parts that don't quite behave. Back when the Francis was a stop on the oilfield run, she said, Adelaine kept books for men who couldn't read receipts and kept rooms for women who didn't need to be asked why they traveled alone. She printed the audit every night, tore the strip, tucked it under the ledger ribbon, and locked the drawer. Her niece said she was proud of how long she could do the math in her headroom tax, city tax, discount for the flood man whose boots never dried. When the hotel closed in 1997, Adelaine kept a key. In 2003, she came in one last time to make the numbers even. She wrote the date, she drew a line. She put her hand to her chest like she was looking for a pen and fell as neat as folding a shirt. The firemen took 10 minutes to arrive. I put flowers on the door, and then the bank put a new lock on the door, and then time put dust on the lock and years on us all. Thalia reached out and touched the printer as if it were the hem of a dress in a department store window. Adelaine believed in drawers that closed, she said. It sounds like over again at 2:17, she gets to do that part, finish the roll, tuck it in, say goodnight to accounts. She is the kind of woman who would find that worth doing. Vesper spent Saturday building a workaround that no manager had asked for and no ghost could be fooled by. She pre-programmed a rule in the printer's network profile. At 2:16, the device would capture its own print job to a text buffer and email it to a special address she made for the Scissortail historian. Proof for people, paper for the room. At 2:15, she and Orson stood in the basement closet like two burglars having second thoughts. Orson touched the breaker switch. He looked at her. She did not nod. He did not flip it. Upstairs in 5B, the printer coughed, purred, and worked. Down here, the old gray panel vibrated, soft as sleep. At 2:20, Vesper's email pinged her phone with a single message. Subject, ledger. Body, 3 lines. Names, rates, the comp, the sign-off. Prepared by A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes. M. She did not sleep that night. She didn't mind. She lay on the bed, hands behind her head, and watched the room recede from what rooms are in daylight containers, shelves, angles, and become what rooms are when you let them be churches. Limits, repetition, silence between notes. She thought about drawers, about the way her work was mostly closing things in the right order so strangers could open them and recognize what they saw, about how a hotel is a machine for forgiving you for not being home. On Sunday, she checked out. She left a thank you envelope at the desk with Quill's name written in neat engineer's block. In it, a printout of the email rule and a small drawing she'd made of the baseboard hole with an arrow labeled here, "The wire remembers." Quill held the envelope like it might be heavier than it was. Letha met her at the door. "I can't exactly put this in a maintenance request," she said, meaning the week Vesper had just spent listening to a machine be more honest than any of them owed their jobs. "But I can tell you what we can do. We can frame a copy of your email in the staff room and call it the drawer letter. We can show it to anyone who works past midnight and forgets that ending is a kindness. We can not run a Halloween promo in 5B because some stories don't belong to customers. We cannot unplug the thing that works for someone who isn't here anymore." Vesper smiled. That's more than most places do for the living. She drove out of Tulsa with the radio off, south, then east, then north again, the planes rolling around her like a low lullaby. She stopped at a gas station where the coffee was too strong and therefore perfect. She called her brother to tell him a story with no real twist and therefore true. She didn't say the name of the printer because sometimes a tool deserves privacy. She didn't say the name of the woman who closed drawers because she had said it enough. She didn't say 217 because she had learned to say it in her head as a kind of vow to be kind to the people who work at that hour. Months later, back in Tulsa for a different job in a different building, she walked past the Scissortail one evening just before Christmas when the lobby held a neighbor party. A small tree wore strands of tickets in place of garland bar tabs printed for fun, red inked with dates and little notes in flare pen script. Quill waved from the desk, a Santa hat angled to keep his dignity. Letha stood by the fireplace talking to a city inspector whose expression said he had learned to sleep at last. On the stair, a woman in her 50s, adjusting an ugly sweater, looked at Vesper in that way strangers sometimes look at one another, as if they had agreed to be in the same hallway before they were born. Vesper stopped in for a minute. She drank cider from a paper cup. She left before anyone could ask for a funny story with a good ending. She slept at a chain hotel by the interstate where the printer in the lobby spat bills for bottled water and where midnight meant nothing in particular. At 2:17, she woke and smiled at the ceiling, not because any machine had called to her, but because she had trained her body to stand witness for a time that belongs to other people. She poured water into a glass and listened to the small sound it made when it met the bottom, hollow turning to full. She said the name she had been given as if returning a borrowed book. She slept again. If you ever find yourself in a hotel room and a device on the desk prints at a time that sounds like a secret, do what Vesper did. Don't yank the cord. Don't film it for the internet like proof is a currency and this is your chance to spend. Sit up, put your feet on the rug, read the names if names arrive. If you can, make a rule that gives the living something to hold a copy, a note, an email to a person whose job is to remember. Then, let the room have its paper. Let the drawer close. Say thank you to the time that isn't yours. The night staff everywhere will feel it like a hand they don't have to see. And if you must know, it goes like this. The little green light winks, the paper unfurls. The names Harlan, Odetta, Quince, Adelaine roll by, small and austere and whole. The room changes by a breath, the heater stands down, the fridge on duty hums, the typewriter in the wall or the idea of a typewriter slides one last carriage to the right and returns. The drawer locks. The ledger for that one night balances again. You will not have been asked to fix anything. You will not have been asked to believe. You will have been asked to witness. A job that counts. When dawn smears light along the window, when the city yawns and rolls, when the night auditor hands the keys back to daytime and goes home to sleep in a room with a plant that knows their voice, you will have been part of the smooth that makes this complicated world possible. Somewhere, a printer coughs once more, polite as always, and waits another 24 hours to do what it knows on the dot without apology. If, later, someone asks why a small hotel on North Boston Avenue keeps a finicky old ticket machine in a room that could rent for $2 more without it, you can say this. Not every device has to justify itself in money. Sometimes a machine is a ritual. Sometimes a ritual is a receipt that proves someone was here and did their work and went to sleep. And sometimes, at 2:17 in the morning, a woman who once locked a drawer she loved gets to do it again, which is as reasonable a reason as any you'll hear for anything that persists in this country, shaped by roads, rooms, ledgers, and the soft insistence of people who finish what they start. The dorm room that kept getting warmer every night. The first night she noticed it, the heat felt like a mistake rather than a message. Early September in Ohio, a Sunday that leaned into Monday, the kind of campus night when cicadas buzz like old streetlights and the dorm's brick walls hold the afternoon sun just long enough to be nostalgic. Isolde Marin unrolled a thrifted rug that smelled faintly of cedar, set two plants on the windowsill like green punctuation, and lay back on the narrow bed under the hum of a fan that tried hard and failed. Sutter Hall, room 412, fourth floor, end of the hall. The radiator beneath the window ticked its polite little ticks. Her phone read 78 inside, while the weather app swore 68 outside. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? The year was 2018. Move-in had been a week of book stacks, cardboard cuts, and names learned in bursts that evaporated by dinner. Isolde's major was urban studies with a minor in printmaking because maps and ink made sense even when people did not. Her roommate, a sophomore transfer named Mairead Klein, arrived with a battered cello case and the posture of someone who had done 3 summers of lifeguarding and was still listening for whistles. Their RA, Bram Delaney, wore a lanyard like a badge and kindness like a habit. The floor smelled like laundry pods and slice and bake cookies. The building smelled like every Midwestern dorm built in the 1970s, a blend of cinder block, old varnish, and the ghost of burnt popcorn. That first night, Isolde pushed the window up 2 inches. The sash stuck, then relented with a groan that sounded like the word careful. She fell asleep to a parking lot lullaby and woke at 2:19 with her neck damp. The fan had not changed. The room had. The little thermometer clipped to her backpack strap said 81. She turned the fan higher. The blades shouted their small capacity. She kicked the blanket down and slept again like a person auditioning for rest. Monday, the heat drifted earlier, 10:47. A wave across her ankles first, then knees, then a slow embrace that felt like a crowded bus in July. She checked the radiator. Cold metal. She put her palm on the cinder block, on the window glass, on the closet door. Nothing from those shapes admitted guilt. Mairead returned from orchestra and set the cello gently on the desk chair. She stood still, chin tilted, the way musicians listen to rooms. "Do you feel that?" she asked. "It keeps getting warmer after midnight," Isolde said. "The building probably overcorrects. Day cools down, system lags, night gets weird." Mairead nodded. "I fell asleep during rehearsal last winter in a practice room. Woke drenched. Found out the steam had backfed into a silent radiator. You could hear it in the walls if you pressed your ear." They both pressed their ears to the dorm wall. The cinder block offered a polite shush, the way libraries used to. No steam, no hiss, just the slow drum of a building's heart. By Wednesday, the room was a decision the night kept making. 83 by 1 a.m., 85 by 3. Isolde checked the hallway, cool enough to be a relief. She checked the stairwell, cooler still. In the common room, a girl wearing a sweatshirt that said ecology means everything had her feet tucked under her and a textbook open like a tent. She looked up. "Your floor hot too." "Only ours," Isolde said. "Or only me. Or only when I try to sleep." They laughed because college teaches you to treat weirdness like weather. You comment, you adapt, you set one more fan on the windowsill and call it a life. Thursday brought a storm that argued with the city for hours. A late summer brawl of heat and lightning. The power hiccuped and then recovered. The building hummed. At 2 a.m., the room hung heavy. Isolde slid out of bed, walked to the window, and pressed her forehead to the screen, as if the night owed her an apology. Far below, a maintenance cart whispered along the service road. She saw the driver's hat and his careful hands. She did not see the face. She told herself the heat felt personal only because you cannot argue with a building and win. By Saturday, the temperature games had found a schedule. 9:58, a nudge. 11:30, a hand on the small of the back. 1:12, the sensation of standing too close to an open oven. Isolde began to time her showers like a boxer timing breath. She tried sleeping on the cool tile of the little bathroom. She tried damp cloths on wrists and ankles. She tried a sliver of ice in a hand towel held to her throat. She tried pretending it was fine. She told no one at home because her mother would only worry and send articles about heat stroke, and her father would suggest a hardware store trip that distance made irrelevant. Sunday night, Mairead woke first. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, said a word that sounded like, "What is this?" and went to the window. The sash had dropped the last inch by itself at some point in the night, closing with that old house suction that makes a soft kiss. She lifted it again, hot air breathed in, not outdoor hot. Not the honest humidity of a Midwest night, different, like the air that escapes when you open a dryer in a laundromat and forget to step back. "We call maintenance in the morning," Mairead said. "We tell them we have an invisible sauna. We use likable voices and the phrase safety concern." Monday morning, Bram came with a clipboard and his likable voice. He listened earnestly, took the temperature with a cheap tool that blinked numbers nobody trusted, wrote down 86, and then underlined it as if underlining were a wrench. He called facilities. They promised someone by afternoon. The someone arrived at 4:19, late enough to be human, early enough to look like hope. His name patch read Gentry. He was the kind of person who stands in a room like it has a puzzle only he can solve and then smiles when the puzzle turns out to be harder. He checked the radiator, the thermostat no one had noticed in the corner with its tiny slider, the vent slits high near the ceiling that made the room look like it could breathe if it wanted to. Steam off, he said. Air handler off. You got a ghost heater. He grinned to make sure they understood he meant the phrase and not the ghost. But he knocked on the radiator anyway, knuckles to iron, the way some people knock on wood when they do not believe in luck and practice it just in case. He opened the closet and frowned. Do you mind? He asked, and shifted their shoes to one side. Behind the shoe rack, a square of plywood patched a hole in the wall. Screws, paint over paint. He crouched, fit a screwdriver into a head, and worked it loose. When the panel came away, a breath of air came with it. Warm, the kind of warm air that has been waiting its turn. Old Chase, he said. Big one. They used to run steam risers along these shafts in the 70s. Maybe a repair, maybe somebody capped something and forgot to ask the night to forgive them. He put his hand into the dark space and paused. He was not afraid. He was listening. Hear that. They leaned closer. At first, only quiet, then a small sound. Not a hiss, not a vapor whisper. A tick. Regular, patient. Like a metronome a long room away. Gentry nodded. Thermal something. Or a tenant below you added a pet space heater that thinks it owns the building. I'll trace the chase. I'll talk to the engineers. He put the panel back gently and made a note on his worksheet with a pencil that had been sharpened to the earnest point of a person who still respects graphite. I will try to fix the physics. In the meantime, get a bigger fan. He winked to soften the fact that bigger fans often just make bigger noise. They bought another fan anyway. They bought clips to hold the window higher. They bought ice in the deli and wrapped it in a towel like a patient. Still, Knight insisted. Isolde began keeping a notebook. It was a habit from a summer job shelving returns. Titles, times, temperatures. Notes that sounded like weather reports written by a poet with a bad sense of humor. The dorm ate the cool at 1:18. The bed felt like a cast iron pan that had forgotten it was retired. I dreamed of a field on fire with no flame. She started staying up with the heat to see if it would reveal its reason. She did readings in the hall where the air felt borderline normal. She ate popsicles and pretended it was study fuel. She took walks at 2 and saw the campus under its other mask. A place of slow bikes and glowing vending machines, and a custodian humming while polishing a floor into a lake. Once she saw Gentry in the stairwell, descending from 5 with a coil of flexible duct over his shoulder like a silver python that had agreed to be helpful. He nodded and lifted one hand without letting the duct slip. Sleep, he said in the tone of a wish. By the 3rd week, a rumor floated into their floor group chat. Sutter Hall used to be a summer dorm for high school programs and band camps. The heat was leftover rehearsal energy. Someone else wrote that an electrical fire in 1979 had bruised the 4th floor and the building was still shy about it. A person named Quillen in 409 posted a link to an archive student newspaper with a grainy photo of firefighters carrying a hose through a stairwell that looked exactly like theirs. Headline: Minor fire, major evacuation, no injuries, cause unknown. Mairead, who believed in research the way some people believe in saint candles, went to the library's basement where old newsprint lives. She returned with photocopies that smelled faintly of toner and dust. The story was sparse. Smoke at 3:03, alarms, students in bathrobes on the lawn, the heat source somewhere inside a wall where a maintenance chase ran, repairs by October, reopening with new paint and the same old radiators. She spread the pages on the desk like cards. There, she said softly, pointing to a little box at the margin. Letter to the editor. Student writes that the heat on 4 was getting worse each night before the fire. RA told them to open windows and hydrate. Facilities said everything within normal range. The days were normal. The nights turned the rooms into ovens. Isolde looked from the paper to the cinder block. Sometimes a run of text looks like a hallway and you want to walk down it with a flashlight. She hit the building's history page on the university site. Donors. Dedications. A black and white photo of a ribbon. Nothing about the night warmth that arrived like someone else's breath. At 1:27, the room grew heavy again. As if their research had rung a bell the building had been waiting to hear. The fan jammed the window open, but the heat came anyway. The little thermometer blinked 88 and then surrendered to the idea that numbers, like sleep, sometimes lose track of themselves. Isolde slept badly and woke with a headache that tasted like pennies. On her desk, the notebook sat open to an entry she did not remember writing. The letters were tidy, her handwriting when she tried to look like someone else. She read the line twice, then 3 times. It said, "Open the panel," and the period at the end looked like a door. She waited until afternoon. Gentry had promised to come back sometime, and sometime often arrives when a person steps away for 5 minutes. At 4 o'clock, with the building's light turned down to that late summer amber, she moved the shoe rack again and unscrewed the panel. The dark behind it was not night, exactly. More like the idea of a hallway after the last person has left and turned the lights off out of habit. She lifted her phone flashlight and aimed it into the chase. Dust motes performed private theater. A vertical shaft, maybe 2 feet across, ran up and down like a secret elevator. Patches where pipes had once been. Scars where brackets had caught things. And there, almost directly under the bottom edge of the opening, a flat ledge of old wood with something resting on it. Isolde reached in with care as if the dark could be brittle. Her fingers found the object's corner. Cardboard. The top felt soft, the way paper does when it has been damp and then forced to pretend it never was. She drew it out. A small box that had once been white and now had become a kind of museum beige. On the lid, written in a hand that pressed too light, a word like a name, Juniper. She set the box on the rug and did not open it. She waited, and the waiting gave her permission to continue. Inside, a stack of index cards tied with string, a folded note, a key on a blue ribbon, narrow as a promise. The note began with, "Dear whoever found this," and continued with the kind of sentences people write when they have been waiting to tell something to a person who will understand. The year at the top of the page read 1979. The signature at the bottom read, "Juniper Vale, Room 4, 16, Sutter Hall." The handwriting leaned to the right, steady as a person who prefers walking to running. "I do not know if I will be believed," it said. "So I am writing this as plainly as I can. Our room is getting warmer each night. The thermometer in our snake plant reads 87 at 3 in the morning. Nobody believes a snake plant. My roommate thinks I am being dramatic. I asked the RA. He said it is just late summer in Ohio. It is not. The heat comes after midnight. It leaves at dawn. The radiator is cold. The vent does not blow. The closet smells like hot iron. I hear ticking in the wall. We are on 4. If you are reading this, maybe you have it too." Isolde felt her own breath echo back from the paragraph. She looked up at the closet door, then at the open chase, as if the words might have leaked. Juniper's note went on, "I work at the cafeteria breakfast shift. I am awake when others are asleep. The heat is a person to me now. It arrives at a time, it stays, it goes. I tried to leave the window open and the sash slid down. I propped it with a book, the book fell, then the window closed by itself. I am not saying a ghost. I am saying something else has a habit here. In case this is useful to you, I am also leaving these. Inside the library's bound journals, someone wrote about a fire on this floor long ago, and then someone else took the page out. I copied what I could before they did. The key is to a storage cabinet in the basement of this building. There are boxes there the staff say are theirs. The key works for the green cabinet that has a dent like a fist. I did not take anything because I got scared. Maybe you will not be. If no one else believes you, I do. I believe you enough to hide this where the building keeps its secrets. If I am wrong, throw this away. If I am right, find what the staff do not talk about. Do not forget to sleep. That is where your spine remembers its job. Mairead came in from rehearsal and stopped when she saw the open panel, the box, the pages laid like a small altar. She sank to the floor and read with both hands pressed flat against the rug as if to steady the words. "We have to find the cabinet," she said, voice quiet like church. "We have to ask Bram to not ask questions." Bram did ask questions because that is also the RA's job. When he saw the note and the box and the panel, he bent his head. He was not a superstitious person, only a person who had worked 3 summers as a camp counselor and learned that buildings hold mood the way lakes hold wind. "I can get you into the basement," he said. "I will walk away from the door and hum loudly so that if anyone asks me what I was doing, I can say I was humming. You will be fast." The basement under Sutter was everything a basement should be. Cool as forgiveness, damp as a memory kept by concrete. The hall shone a soft yellow that made everything look like a faded photograph. Green cabinets lined one wall. The third from the end had a dent like a fist. The key ribbon was blue. The lock turned. Inside, cardboard boxes labeled with dates and short phrases. Stack of work orders, Steam archive, fire log, staff do not remove. The handwriting on the labels was neat and stern. Mairead reached up and slid one down. The bottom sagged ominously. They set it on the floor. Inside, manila folders swollen with damp and years. Isolde opened one and pulled a sheet carefully so it would not split. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 416. Unusual heat after midnight. Radiator cold. Closet warm. Check chase, check riser. She set it aside and pulled another. Work order, Sutter 4. Room 412. Student reports late heat, not present daytime. Housekeeping notes window sash malfunctioning. Recommend maintenance weld stop. Isolde looked up. Weld stop. She imagined a person 40 years earlier thinking a sliding sash a nuisance and telling someone to make it tame. Another folder. Fire log, September. Smell of hot iron. Call at 3-3. Response within 3 minutes. Source uncertain. Damage limited to inside of chase between 412 and 416. Cause undetermined. Recommendation: cap steam riser permanently at basement and roof. Service ticket created. The paper clipped to the recommendation was a receipt for parts and a penciled note reading, "Done." A second note added another sentence in a different hand. Night crew reports residual heat persists. Monitor. Mairead pressed her palm over her own heart. This is the story of every building that tries to forget. The parts get fixed, the habit stays. They took photos with their phones like archivists on a deadline. They replaced the folders in the box with the care of people dressing a child who was finally asleep. They locked the cabinet. Bram hummed. The hallway air kept its cool. Back upstairs, they sat with the panel open and the note on the rug, and the cooling afternoon creeping through the window like a kind visitor. Isolde's notebook waited with its white page. She wrote, "Juniper, thank you." She did not know where to put the sentence, so she put it on the first line under the date so it would be the thing the day had to carry. At 1:28, the heat returned. It did not surge. It arrived politely, like a person who has been taught to knock. Isolde sat on the floor beside the open chase and placed her hand just inside without touching any side. The air felt warmer than the room, as if the chase were a throat exhaling a breath it had saved. "What do you want?" she said aloud, not because she thought the building would answer, but because sometimes the voice knows which door truth stands behind. The tick came again, regular, small. Isolde counted between ticks. 3 seconds, 3 seconds, 3 seconds. The rhythm made a shape in her mind, not a clock, a valve. A thing that opens and then holds. A thing that believes in intervals. She looked at the radiator. At the elbow joint where the old pipe met the shutoff wheel, a tiny telltale stain had crept along the seam, brown and precise. She leaned closer. Warm, not hot. Warm like a wrist. Gentry returned the next day with a partner whose name patch read Tova. They listened, as technicians do when the room is allowed to make its case. Isolde showed them the cabinet photos. Tova's lips kept a straight line while her eyebrows confessed their feelings. They pulled the panel and shone better light. They found the old riser, capped, cool. They found a newer run of conduit laid up the side at some later date, carrying wires, not heat. They found insulation collapsed onto itself like old cake. They found nothing that pointed to a flame or a hiss. Tova ran a thermal camera along the cinder block. The screen glowed in false color. A vertical stripe warmer than its neighbors lay behind the closet and the head of the bed. Not red, not danger, yellow shading into orange. Residual, Gentry said, could be heat migrating from a lower source, could be a hot water loop bringing showers to the floor below with more enthusiasm than planned. But the loop below doesn't run at 3 in the morning, Tova said. She had the nap schedule of the building memorized. She pointed to the thermal stripe. This is a habit. They scheduled a shutdown for the following night, midnight to 4. The building would sigh and then sleep while they opened valves and listened for the kind of silence that tells the truth. Bram knocked on doors and posted signs. The girls in Ecology Means Everything, Sweats, groaned about showers and then agreed. The 4th floor exhaled in a collective okay. At 12:12, the pumps slowed. The fan in 412 made its small, brave wind. The window held at 3 inches with 2 clips like a pair of loyal hands. At 1:27, the room still warmed. Not as high, not as fast, but enough to say, I am here. Isolde sat on the rug and pressed her shoulder to the closet wall. She closed her eyes so hearing could be her only job. She heard the tick. She heard Myreed's breath even. She heard, outside, a late skateboard roll between classes like a drum. And she heard, very faint and not from the chase at all, a tone. Not a pipe, not a fan, not foreseeable. A note, caught and held. Then gone. She opened her eyes. Mairead was looking at her with a musician's gaze. You heard it too. What is it? Isolde asked. A harmonic. The kind you get when a sympathetic thing vibrates because its friend is nearby. She touched the cello case. Instruments do it, rooms do it, bodies do it when they are convinced. She stood, walked to the bookshelf, lifted a glass of water, and set it on the radiator. The surface quivered. A ripple. A second one. The pattern of the tick. Mairead tuned by memory and sang a single, low pitch, almost under her breath. A hum that could have been mistaken for a thought. The glass shivered. The tick in the wall danced out of step, then found her beat, then stilled as if listening, then returned. What if, she said quietly, all this is sound pretending to be heat? Isolde did not laugh. She had learned the month prior that grief can pretend to be a quiz grade and hunger can pretend to be impatience. Why not sound pretending to be heat? She ran her palm along the cinder block, then placed it flat and left it. A warmth answered. The next day was October 1st. Campus wore flannel and pretended it had always loved cinnamon. Facilities sent an email with the subject line Steam Update that promised further investigation and patience. The 4th floor shared a thread of remedies and rituals. Bowls of ice, mist bottles, wet socks trick, floor naps. No one suggested sage. Someone suggested prayer with a grin that did not deny its usefulness. That night, the heat arrived like a smaller animal. 81, 82, a steady hold at 83. Manageable if you learned how. Isolde placed the glass on the radiator again, turned off the fans, and waited for quiet to settle where it belongs. Mairead sang once, twice, and stopped. The glass's ripples slowed. The tick shifted to the far side of the closet. A draft found her ankles like a cat checking for attention. The room listened back. They made it through October with methods that would have looked ridiculous out of context and were ordinary inside it. They slept with wet towels folded like scarves. They studied in the hall and accepted that their room had been reclassified as a place you prepared to enter rather than a place you lived. They kept the panel off. They learned to say thank you to cool mornings and to say aloud the promise to return before night put its hand on the doorknob. One evening, after a storm blew leaves against the window like letters trying to enter, Bram knocked and leaned in. Facilities found something, he said. You want to come see? The invitation sounded like a friend offering to show you where a magic trick hides its thread. In the basement, Tova stood beside the building's old heart, piping like veins, valves like knuckles, tags tied with string, naming parts from an era that believed names mattered. She pointed to a run that disappeared into the wall beneath, where 412 would stand above them. Here, a capped branch, not steam, an old electrical conduit bypassed years ago. It sits next to a hot water loop. When the loop runs heavy during evening showers, it warms the conduit and then the chase. The chase carries that warmth upward. At night, when the loop cycles to keep the building from feeling abandoned, the warmth lingers. The panel in your closet became the mouth of it. A small chimney with no smoke. Gentry tapped the conduit with his knuckle. You could call it physics, you could also call it habit. Either is the right answer. They installed insulation around the conduit. They added an air brake in the chase so warmth would stop treating the wall like a ladder. They replaced the window's stiff cords so the sash would consent to stay where a human asked it to stay. They promised it would help. They did not promise everything. It helped. The nights cooled to numbers that looked like decimals instead of pronouncements. 77. 76 when the wind took an interest. Isolde slept without wet towels. She still woke at 1:27 once, for no reason except the body's loyalty to former alarms. She lay there and listened. The room made its old house noises. Outside, snow rehearsed far away and then gave up. She fell asleep, mouthing the word juniper the way a person mouths the name of a bus stop, to remember where to get off next time. November brought a letter. Real paper, wiggle of ink, the return address, for a dorm across campus, Reed Hall. Inside, 2 sentences in a tidy hand. I found your note in the basement box when Bram fetched more tape for door decorations. My aunt's name was Juniper Vale. She lived in Sutter in 1979. I have a photo of her in front of a radiator holding a cup of tea and laughing like the tea was a joke. Thank you for believing her. Signed, Quillen Vale, room 305. Isolde wrote back. She wrote about the cabinet and the boxes and the way the building had tried to forget. Quillen wrote again with a copy of the photo. Juniper looked like someone who would hide a note and trust the future. Hair gathered in a bandana, eyes practicing mischief. The radiator behind her, upright as a soldier that had decided to sit. Finals arrived like weather that had been announced for weeks and still surprised everyone. Mairead spent long hours in the practice rooms, bow rising and falling like a small boat riding out a swell. Isolde finished a printmaking project of 14 little maps of Sutter Hall. She gave the stairwells names. She drew the 4th floor twice, once by day, once by night. She printed in blue and rust. She added a tiny red dot where their closet panel sat like a secret door. She titled the piece, Heat Rises, Then Cool Heads. On the last night before winter break, they propped the door open and played a playlist of songs that sounded like leaving without saying goodbye. Their neighbors drifted in. Cups of cocoa. A plate of cookies that looked store-bought and tasted like grief in the shape of sugar. Someone told a story about a chessboard left in a laundry room that always had one piece moved between midnight and dawn. Someone else told a story about a campus fountain that ran warm all winter like a stubborn rumor. They laughed easily because relief had come. Before midnight, Bram stood in the doorway with his clipboard and a tired smile and said, "Thank you for not setting anything on fire this semester," which is a low bar that feels high after October. Isolde slept early and woke with the feeling of being watched in a kind way. She rolled over and looked at the open panel. The chase breathed a soft, neutral air. She whispered the habit of her thanks the way some people say grace. For the cool, for the note, for the way buildings hold hands with the people who listen. In January, when the term began again and the air cut like paper, the room behaved. The radiator learned its job when asked. The night stopped bringing heat like a dare. The panel stayed off anyway. They left it open not because they liked the view of a dark shaft, but because some doors, once discovered, should not be forced to forget they can open. One night in late February, when snow made a tidy line along the windowsill and the hall smelled like wool and wet boots, Mairead tuned and held a low note the way a person can hold a breath when they want the person across from them to finish their thought. The glass on the radiator did not ripple, the tick did not come. She let the note go, she smiled. Habit broken, she said, and then added, or perhaps trained. Spring came in fits of joy and apology. Sutter Hall turned quiet, then loud, then quiet again. Finals chalked the sidewalks with equations and wishes. On the last afternoon before move out, Gentry and Tova came by with a work order that did not need signatures. "We are capping the chase permanently," Tova said. "Not the kind of permanent that forgets. The kind that leaves a note for the next person." Gentry nodded at the open panel. "Leave it if you want, we're not offended." He tapped the cinder block once with his knuckle and said, "Thanks for telling us. We need buildings to snitch on us. Otherwise, we fix the wrong things." They closed their boxes. They took the plants off the sill. They rolled the rug into a new shape. Bram signed their checkout forms with a flourish. In the hall, Isolde taped one last paper to the wall at eye level between 412 and 416. Not a manifesto, not a myth, a map. She had printed 2 copies. The little red dot, the words, "If your room gets warmer every night, you are not dramatic and you are not alone." The panel in the closet is held by 4 screws. Please listen for the tick. Please go to the basement cabinet with the green dent. And please, sleep. Your spine remembers its job when you do. She signed it tiny, just initials, because the story did not belong to her alone. Years later, when she would sleep in cities with windows that sealed shut and air that arrived by command, she would sometimes wake at 1:27 and rest her palm against the wall. Habit, memory, a check-in with the building around her. She would feel the honest cool of drywall. She would hear the thrum of someone's TV 3 floors down, or a neighbor's late laugh, and think, heat pretended to be sound, then sound pretended to be heat, and we learned to name what was ours to name. If you are listening to this, and your room keeps getting warmer every night, put your hand on the wall. Count between the ticks if you hear them. Call the person with the name Patch and the quiet eyes. Ask them to look for the habit behind the system. And if you find a note in a chase, write your own, then leave the panel open long enough for the room to remember it can breathe. The night will arrive either way. It is better when it finds you ready, with a glass of water on the radiator and a song in your pocket that knows how to lay its hand gently on the room and say, "We hear you, we're staying. We're going to keep you company until morning cools the world back into something we can bear."